The flicker of red and blue lights in your rearview mirror is a universal trigger for anxiety. But for Federal Agent Marcus Thorne, a man driving a car worth more than the officer's annual salary, that anxiety was different. It was the cold, familiar dread of being seen not as a citizen, but as a suspect. He was a decorated agent of the FBI, a protector of the nation, but in that moment, under the blinding glare of police spotlights on a rainy night, he was just a black man in the wrong part of town. What followed wasn't a routine traffic stop. It was a descent into a nightmare where a badge became a weapon and a cry for justice was met with the cold steel of a gun barrel. This is the story of the moment that cost a cop everything, and the brutal, unforgiving karma that followed. The night was a slick black mirror. Rain fell in relentless sheets over the affluent, tree-lined streets of Oakhaven, a suburb that prided itself on its manicured lawns and its homogeneous tranquility. For FBI Special Agent Marcus Thorne, it was just the tail end of a grueling 72-hour stakeout. He was bone-tired, his mind a numb buzz of caffeine and stale adrenaline. His car, a sleek, unassuming black Audi A8, was a government-issued vehicle chosen specifically for its ability to blend in, or so he thought. He drove carefully, the wipers beating a hypnotic rhythm against the deluge. He wasn't speeding. His registration was current. His license was clean. He was by every conceivable measure a model citizen. Yet when the strobing red and blue lights filled his rearview mirror, a familiar bitter tightness coiled in his gut. It was a feeling he'd known long before he ever carried a badge and gun of his own. It was the feeling of being targeted. He pulled over immediately, the Audi's tires hissing to a stop on the wet asphalt. He killed the engine, turned on the interior dome light, and placed his hands in plain sight on the steering wheel, just as he'd been taught by his father, decades before he was ever taught by the FBI Academy at Quantico. The protocol was second nature, a survival instinct honed over a lifetime of similar encounters. The police cruiser, a standard Ford Explorer parked behind him, its headlights pinning him in a harsh interrogative glare. A minute passed, then 2. It was a classic intimidation tactic, letting the driver stew in a cocktail of anxiety and uncertainty. Marcus remained perfectly still, his eyes on the rearview mirror, watching the silhouette of the officer. Finally, the car door opened, and a figure emerged. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who filled out a police uniform with an air of imposing authority. He moved with a deliberate, heavy-footed swagger, his hand resting casually on the butt of his holstered sidearm. Rain plastered his short, sandy blonde hair to his scalp. As he approached the driver's side window, Marcus could see his face more clearly in the ambient light. It was a face etched with a kind of smug belligerence, the mouth set in a thin, dismissive line. His name tag, glinting under the dome light, read, Miller. Officer Jack Miller tapped the glass with a thick knuckle. It wasn't a polite rap, it was a demand. Marcus lowered the window, and a spray of cold rain misted into the luxurious cabin. "Evening, Marcus," said his voice, calm and even. "License and registration." Miller grunted, his eyes not on Marcus, but roving over the car's interior. He peered at the leather seats, the polished dashboard, the subtle glow of the infotainment screen. His gaze was an accusation. "How can you afford this?" "Of course," Officer Marcus replied. He kept his movements slow and deliberate. "My wallet is in my jacket pocket on the passenger seat. My registration is in the glove box. May I have your permission to retrieve them?" Miller's eyes narrowed. "Just keep your hands where I can see 'em." My hands are on the steering wheel, Marcus stated, not moving an inch. I'm informing you of my intent to move them to retrieve my documents as per your request. A flicker of annoyance crossed Miller's face. He clearly wasn't used to this level of composed articulation. Fine. Get it. Slowly. Marcus reached over, his movements fluid, and measured. He retrieved the leather wallet and the registration from the glove compartment. As he passed them out the window, his sleeve slid back, revealing a high-end Omega Seamaster on his wrist. Miller's eyes fixated on the watch, his lip curling almost imperceptibly. He took the documents and retreated to his cruiser, without another word. The minutes stretched on again. 10 minutes. 15. Marcus knew what was happening. Miller was running his name, his plates looking for anything. A forgotten parking ticket, a clerical error, any flimsy pretext to escalate the situation. He was hoping for a hit. Marcus knew he wouldn't find one. The car was registered to a shell corporation, a standard FBI practice for undercover vehicles. His own record was, of course, spotless. The rain began to fall even harder, drumming a frantic tattoo on the roof of the car. Finally, Officer Miller re-emerged from his vehicle, walking back towards the Audi with that same arrogant stride. But this time, something was different. The belligerence had sharpened into open hostility. He held Marcus's license and registration in one hand, but his other hand was now ungloved, resting once again on his firearm. Marcus Thorne Miller, said his voice dripping with condescension as he read the name from the license. This car is registered to a Goliath Holdings, LLC. Who's that? It's a fleet vehicle officer. I work for the company, Marcus answered, truthfully, if not completely. Miller let out a short, derisive laugh. Right. Work for the company. And what kind of work do you do, Marcus, that gets you a $100,000 car and a watch that costs more than my mortgage? The question was loaded, the insinuation as thick and suffocating as the humid night air. You're a drug dealer, a criminal, a thug. The words hung unspoken between them. I'm in corporate security, Marcus said, keeping his voice level. He could feel his heart rate begin to climb, a low thrum of anger starting to burn through his professional calm. He had faced down terrorists, infiltrated organized crime rings, and stared death in the face. But nothing ignited his fury quite like this casual, demeaning brand of racism. Corporate security. Miller sneered, savoring the words as if they were a punchline. That's a good one. You look more like the kind of guy corporations hire security to protect themselves from. That was it. The line had been crossed. Years of training screamed at Marcus to remain passive, to de-escalate, to survive the encounter, and file a complaint later. But the man, not the agent, felt a surge of indignation. Officer Marcus said, his voice hardening, losing its placid edge. Is there a reason I was pulled over? Have I committed some kind of traffic violation? Miller's face darkened. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. You're the one asking questions now. Here's how this works. I ask the questions. You answer them. Your tail light is out. Marcus glanced at his dashboard. The car's advanced diagnostic system would have instantly alerted him to any malfunction, major or minor. There were no warnings. The tail light was fine. It was a lie, a pretext. With all due respect, Officer, I'm certain my tail light is functional, Marcus said. But if you'd like to write me a citation for it, please do so, and we can be on our way. A little feisty, aren't we? Miller said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He seemed to be enjoying this savoring the power he held. Maybe we should have a closer look at this company car. He shone his flashlight into the back seat. What's in the trunk? Marcus. Got a lot of corporate security equipment back there. It's just my luggage, officer. I think I'll be the judge of that, Miller said, straightening up. Step out of the car. This was a critical juncture. A request to exit the vehicle during a traffic stop was lawful. A search of the trunk without cause was not. Marcus knew his rights better than Miller knew the law. In the trunk was not luggage, but a locked Pelican case containing his FBI-issued rifle ammunition and other sensitive tactical gear. Allowing a search was not an option. Officer, you have my license and registration. You have no probable cause to search my vehicle, Marcus stated firmly. I do not consent to a search. Miller's face contorted with rage. It was the defiant challenge to his authority that pushed him over the edge. The smug bully couldn't stand being told no. Oh, you don't consent, he snarled. I've got all the probable cause I need right in front of me. He gestured vaguely at Marcus at his skin at his car. Now I'm going to tell you one last time. Step out of the car. Marcus knew he was out of options. De-escalation had failed. Asserting his rights had only made things worse. He was dealing with a man who was not interested in the law, only in dominance. He had to end this now. Okay, Marcus said softly. Before I exit the vehicle, and for your own safety and awareness, I need to inform you that I am a federal law enforcement officer. Miller froze, his hand tightening on his weapon. He stared at Marcus for a long moment, and then he threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, ugly sound that echoed in the rainy night. Oh, that is rich, he cackled, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. A Fed. You think I'm that stupid? That's the oldest trick in the book. It's not a trick, Marcus said, his voice deadly serious. He reached slowly, deliberately for the inside pocket of his jacket. My credentials are in my... He never finished the sentence. The click of the holster's safety release was deafeningly loud. In a flash of movement that was surprisingly swift for a man his size, Miller drew his Glock 17. The dark, menacing maw of the barrel was suddenly just inches from Marcus's face, a stark black hole against the backdrop of the flashing police lights. "Don't you move, Miller!" screamed his voice, cracking with a mixture of rage and adrenaline. "Don't you fucking move a muscle! Hands on the dash! Now!" Marcus froze his hand, hovering just inches from his badge and federal ID. The world seemed to slow down. He could see the raindrops clinging to the barrel of the gun. He could see the wild, unhinged look in Officer Miller's eyes. This was no longer a traffic stop. This was a man with a badge and a god complex who was seconds away from making a fatal mistake. And Marcus Thorne, a man who hunted the country's most dangerous criminals, was staring down the barrel of a gun held by a racist cop on a power trip. The rain was a cold, indifferent witness. Inside the Audi, the air was thick with the smell of wet asphalt and ozone and the tangible metallic scent of imminent violence. Marcus Thorne's mind, trained to operate under extreme duress, became a machine of pure, cold calculation. Subject is Officer Jack Miller, his brain catalogued. Male Caucasian, mid-30s. Height approx 6'2", weight, 230 pounds. Right-handed. Weapon is a Glock 17 9mm. Finger is on the trigger, not indexed. Posture is aggressive, unstable. Pupils are dilated. Voice is exhibiting high levels of stress and agitation. He is compromised. He is a threat. Hands on the dash. Miller shrieked again, spittle flying from his lips. Slowly, Marcus raised his hands from his chest and placed them flat against the dashboard, palms up. The gesture was meant to be one of surrender, of de-escalation, but every fiber of his being screamed to act. He could disarm Miller in under 2 seconds. He had practiced the move 1,000 times. A twist of the wrist, a redirection of the weapon, an elbow strike to the jaw. It would be brutally efficient. But he couldn't. He was a black man in a fancy car. And this was Miller's world. If he fought back, if he so much as flinched, Miller would pull the trigger. And in the aftermath, the narrative would be written for him. Suspect lunged for the officer's weapon. Officer feared for his life. It was a story told over and over again in morgues and courtrooms across the country. His FBI credentials, if they were ever found, would be dismissed as a desperate, posthumous lie. "That's better." Miller spat his breathing ragged. The gun didn't waver. "Thought you were a tough guy, huh? A federal officer. You're nothing but a damn thug." "Officer Miller." Marcus said, his voice astonishingly calm. He had to keep him talking. He had to anchor him to reality, pull him back from the precipice of a homicide. "Listen to me very carefully. My name is Special Agent Marcus Thorne. My badge and credentials are in my left breast pocket. I am with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Norfolk Field Office. My supervisor's name is Assistant Special Agent in Charge, David Chen. His number is on my ID. I am currently on official duty." He delivered the information in a steady, rhythmic cadence, the way a hostage negotiator would speak to a captor. He needed to pierce the bubble of rage that enveloped Miller. Miller's response was a sneer. "You got a whole story worked out, don't you? You guys are all the same. Think you can talk your way out of anything?" He gestured with the gun barrel towards the passenger seat. "What's in the jacket I just told you?" "My credentials." "Yeah, sure." "Credentials," Miller mocked. "Or maybe it's a weapon, or drugs. You know what, I don't care. You're under arrest. Under arrest for what Marcus challenged, testing the boundaries. Driving while black. Having a nice car." The words hit Miller like a physical blow. His face, already flushed with anger, turned a blotchy, furious red. Resisting arrest. Fleeing and eluding lying to a police officer. "Take your pick," he roared. "Now shut your mouth before I decide to add assaulting an officer to the list." The situation was spiraling out of control. Miller was no longer thinking. He was reacting, building a fantasy in his head to justify his own bigotry. He was creating a crime where none existed. It was at that moment that the sound of another siren cut through the night, this one growing rapidly closer. A second patrol car was arriving. For a fleeting second, Marcus felt a surge of hope. A witness. Another officer who might be rational, who might see the situation for what it was. A fellow officer dangerously off the rails. The hope died as soon as the second cruiser pulled up. A younger, wiry officer, whose name tag Marcus couldn't see, jumped out. He saw Miller's gun drawn and immediately drew his own, taking a tactical position by the rear of the Audi. He didn't ask questions. He didn't assess. He just saw his partner with a gun on a black man and assumed the man was the threat. He was following the script. "Everything okay, Jack?" the new officer shouted over the rain. "Yeah, I'm good, Tim," Miller yelled back, his confidence bolstered by the arrival of backup. "Got a real special one here." "Claims he's a Fed?" He laughed that ugly laugh again. "Now I'm gonna open the door. You keep him covered." Miller, with his gun, still trained on Marcus's head, with one hand reached for the Audi's door handle with the other. This was it. Once the door was open, Marcus would be dragged out, thrown to the wet pavement and cuffed. The case in his trunk would be illegally searched. The discovery of his service weapon would seal his fate in Miller's twisted narrative. He had to do something. Officer Miller. I strongly advise against opening that door. Marcus said, his voice low and urgent. You are making a catastrophic mistake. The only mistake here was you thinking you could play me for a fool. Miller snarled, his fingers closing around the handle. Dispatch. This is Unit 7. A new voice suddenly crackled over the radio in Miller's cruiser, the sound barely audible over the storm. Be advised the subject of that traffic stop. Marcus Thorne is a special agent with the FBI. I repeat, subject is a federal agent. FBI Norfolk has been notified of the stop and is requesting immediate contact with the primary officer. Supervisor is en route to your location. Acknowledge. The world stopped. The blood drained from Officer Miller's face. The color vanished so completely that he looked like a marble statue in the flashing lights. His eyes, wide with shock, darted from Marcus to the radio in his own car, then back to Marcus. The gun in his hand, which had been so steady and menacing, suddenly trembled. The younger officer, Tim, lowered his weapon, a look of profound confusion on his face. Jack. Did you hear that Miller didn't answer? He was frozen, his mind struggling to process the information that had just detonated his reality. The thug in the fancy car, the man he had profiled, demeaned, and was about to arrest on fabricated charges, was exactly who he said he was. The implications of his actions crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. He had just held a gun to the head of an FBI agent. Marcus seized the opportunity. He didn't gloat. He didn't say, "I told you so." He took control. Officer Miller. Marcus commanded, his voice now imbued with the full authority of his office. Holster your weapon. Now. Miller stared at him dumbfounded. The Glock was still pointed in Marcus's direction, a monument to his colossal error in judgment. Holster. Your weapon. Marcus repeated each word, a spike of ice. As if in a trance, Miller slowly, shakily lowered the gun and secured it in his holster. The immediate threat was over, but the air was now charged with a different kind of tension. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a career ending. Headlights cut through the rain, but these weren't the flashing red and blue of a patrol car. A black unmarked sedan, a Chevrolet Tahoe, screeched to a halt behind the two cruisers. A man in a suit, heedless of the downpour, burst from the driver's side. He was broad with silver-flecked black hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. His expression was one of controlled fury. Marcus recognized him instantly. It was Oak Haven's chief of police, Michael Ramirez. Chief Ramirez was a cop's cop, a man who had come up through the ranks and commanded universal respect. He was known for his fierce loyalty to his officers, but also for his unyielding, ironclad commitment to professional conduct. He tolerated no corruption, no abuse of power, and no racism. He was the reason Marcus, during his own interagency briefings, had always considered the Oak Haven PD to be a professional and reliable department. Ramirez stormed towards them, his eyes locking onto Miller. He didn't even glance at Marcus. He only had eyes for his officer. Miller. What in God's name is going on here? Ramirez's voice was a low roar that cut through the sound of the rain. Miller looked like a child who had been caught setting a fire. He stammered his words, a jumbled, incoherent mess. Chief, The car. He wouldn't. I thought Ramirez wasn't listening. He had seen enough. He had heard the radio call. He saw the gun being holstered. He saw the look of terror on Miller's face and the look of cold, professional calm on the face of the man in the Audi. He understood the entire situation in a heartbeat. He stopped directly in front of Miller, so close that their chests were almost touching. He was shorter than Miller, but he radiated an aura of authority that made him seem 10 feet tall. "You pulled your weapon on a federal agent?" Ramirez asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Chief, he was being evasive. He wouldn't consent to a search. He claimed he was a Fed. I thought it was a trick," Miller pleaded, his voice cracking. "Did you call it in?" Ramirez shot back. "Did you run his credentials through dispatch before you drew your weapon? Did you do any part of your job correctly?" Silence. Miller's face was the answer. Ramirez's jaw tightened. The fury in his eyes was volcanic. He looked at the younger officer, Tim. "You. Get back in your vehicle. Await instructions." "Yes, Chief," the officer said, practically sprinting back to his cruiser, desperate to escape the blast radius. Ramirez turned his attention back to Miller. For a long moment, he just stared at him, the silence stretching into an eternity. When he finally spoke, his voice was filled with a chilling mixture of contempt and sorrow. "I have spent 25 years building the reputation of this department," Ramirez said, his voice raspy with emotion. "I have worked every single day to earn the trust of the community we serve and the respect of our fellow law enforcement agencies. We are supposed to be better than this. You were supposed to be better than this." He jabbed a finger into Miller's chest. "You didn't see a citizen tonight, Miller. You saw a skin color and a nice car, and you let the ugly, ignorant poison in your heart take over. You didn't see a potential federal partner. You saw a nail, and you decided to be the hammer. You disgraced yourself. You disgraced this department, and you endangered the life of a man who puts his life on the line for this country every single day." Ramirez's eyes were blazing. He looked at the badge on Miller's chest, the polished silver shield that was supposed to be a symbol of honor and public trust. "You are not worthy of this badge," he snarled. With a swift, savage motion, Chief Ramirez reached out and grabbed the badge. There was a loud, tearing sound as the Velcro strip that held it to the uniform gave way. Ramirez ripped it from Miller's chest and held it in his palm, staring at it as if it were something vile. Officer Jack Miller stood there, stunned into silence, a dark, empty patch on his uniform where his authority used to be. The rain continued to fall, washing over a man who in the space of 15 minutes had just lost everything. Chief Ramirez, his face a mask of cold fury, turned away from the disgraced officer and finally walked towards the open window of the Audi, the ripped-off badge still clutched in his fist. Chief Ramirez approached the Audi, his expression shifting from incandescent rage to one of deep professional regret. He looked at Marcus, who had remained silent and still throughout the entire ordeal, a stoic observer to the dramatic implosion of another man's career. The chief held up the badge he had just torn from Miller's uniform. "Agent Thorne Ramirez," said his voice heavy. "On behalf of the Oak Haven Police Department, I offer you my deepest, most sincere apology. There is no excuse for what happened here tonight. None." Marcus finally allowed himself to relax the tension draining from his shoulders. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Thank you, Chief Ramirez. I appreciate that. I've put Miller on immediate unpaid administrative leave pending termination proceedings. Ramirez continued, his voice tight with resolve. His service weapon and all department property will be confiscated before he leaves this scene. He will not work another shift in this town. You have my word on that. What about the second officer? Marcus asked, his gaze shifting to the other patrol car, where the young officer Tim was still sitting, likely replaying the night's events in his head. He will be subject to a full internal affairs investigation, Ramirez assured him. At a minimum, he's looking at a significant suspension and mandatory retraining. His failure to intervene, to question, to do anything other than follow a compromised officer's lead is a serious breach of protocol. Today he learns a hard lesson about accountability. Ramirez then looked at Marcus with a question in his eyes. The next steps are yours, Agent. The U.S. Attorney's Office will be notified. They can pursue federal charges for assault on a federal officer. My department will cooperate fully with any and all investigations. We will give you everything you ask for. Marcus considered this. He could, with a single phone call, set in motion a legal process that would almost certainly land Jack Miller in a federal prison for years. The thought brought him a grim, fleeting satisfaction. But his objective wasn't vengeance. It was justice, and more importantly, it was ensuring this never happened to anyone else. For now, Chief, I just want to go home, Marcus said wearily. My report will be on my supervisor's desk in the morning. The Bureau will decide how to proceed. But I'll tell you this, the fact that you handled this with integrity right here and now speaks volumes. Ramirez nodded, the gratitude on his face palpable. Thank you, Agent. Get home safe. As Chief Ramirez walked away to oversee the dismantling of Miller's official identity, Marcus finally put the Audi in gear and pulled away from the curb. In his rearview mirror, he saw Jack Miller standing alone in the rain, a hollowed-out figure under the indifferent flashing lights, his future a gaping black void. Marcus didn't feel triumph. He just felt an immense, soul-crushing fatigue. The fallout was immediate and explosive. By the next morning, the story was already leaking. Not to the major news networks, but to the niche blogs and online forums that tracked police misconduct. The initial report was just whispers an Oak Haven cop fired after a dispute during a traffic stop, but the details were too dramatic to stay contained for long. The official story broke 2 days later, not from the police department, but from the U.S. Attorney's Office. They announced they were charging former Oak Haven police officer Jack Miller with a litany of federal crimes, including assault on a federal officer and deprivation of rights under color of law. The press release was sparse on details, but it mentioned the victim was an on-duty FBI agent, and the incident occurred during a traffic stop. That was all the fuel the media needed. The story went from a local incident to a national headline in a matter of hours. A young, ambitious reporter for the Virginia Pilot newspaper named Sarah Jenkins was assigned the story. Jenkins was a tenacious investigator with a reputation for digging deeper than her competitors. She wasn't content with the official press releases. She wanted the human story. She wanted to know who Jack Miller was. Her first calls were to the Oak Haven PD. She was met with a wall of no comment, citing the ongoing federal investigation. Chief Ramirez released a single, carefully worded statement expressing his department's commitment to accountability and public trust, but refused to comment on Miller specifically. So Jenkins started digging into Miller's past. She filed Freedom of Information Act requests for his personnel, file his complaint history, and his use of force reports. While the most sensitive documents were sealed, she managed to unearth a pattern. Over his 12-year career, Jack Miller had accumulated a startling number of citizen complaints, 18 in total. The vast majority of them were for discourteous conduct or abuse of authority. And as Jenkins noted, with a raised eyebrow, 16 of those 18 complaints were filed by African American or Hispanic residents. All 18 had been dismissed internally with a finding of unsubstantiated or officer acted within department policy. She found one particularly damning report from 3 years prior. A local black pastor, Reverend Dr. David Wilson, had filed a formal complaint alleging that Officer Miller had pulled him over for no reason, verbally berated him, and illegally searched his car, all while making racially charged jokes. The complaint had been investigated by Miller's direct supervisor at the time, a sergeant who was also Miller's close friend, and had been quickly dismissed. Jenkins called Reverend Wilson. The pastor was hesitant to speak at first, the memory still a source of pain and humiliation. He treated me like I was scum on his shoe. Reverend Wilson told Jenkins, his voice heavy with the memory. He asked me what a guy like me was doing in a neighborhood like this. He pulled my Bible out of my glove compartment and asked if I'd actually read it. I filed a complaint. I went down to the station. I did everything you're supposed to do, and nothing happened. They protect their own. I told my wife that night that a man with that much hate in his heart would eventually destroy himself. It seems his day of reckoning has finally arrived. Jenkins's article was a bombshell. It painted a picture not of a single momentary lapse in judgment, but of a long, clear pattern of racist behavior that had been ignored and enabled by the department for over a decade. The story provided crucial context. Miller wasn't a good cop who had one bad night. He was a cancer that the department had refused to excise. For Jack Miller, the world had ended. The termination was swift and brutal. He was stripped of his pension, his health insurance, and his identity. He had been a cop since he was 22 years old. It was all he knew. Now he was nothing. His phone, which once buzzed constantly with calls and texts from his brothers in blue, fell silent. The friends who had once slapped him on the back and laughed at his jokes now crossed the street to avoid him. He was a pariah, a liability. The thin blue line had closed ranks, leaving him on the outside. His wife Laura, who had always seen him as a hero, was forced to confront the ugly truth revealed in Jenkins's article. The late-night rants he used to go on about the thugs and animals he dealt with on the job suddenly took on a new horrifying clarity. She saw the man from the Reverend's story, not the husband she thought she knew. Their house, once filled with boisterous laughter, became a tomb of strained silences and hushed bitter arguments. The financial pressure mounted almost immediately. Without his salary, they were staring down the barrel of foreclosure. He tried to find work. He applied for private security jobs, the natural next step for an ex-cop. But his name was now toxic. The moment a potential employer ran a background check and saw the pending federal charges, the interview was over. The answer was always a polite but firm no. He grew increasingly bitter and isolated. He spent his days stewing in his own resentment, watching the news reports that painted him as a monster, a racist caricature. In his mind, he was the victim. He had been tricked. Agent Thorne, with his calm demeanor and fancy car, had set him up. Chief Ramirez had betrayed him, throwing him to the wolves to save the department's reputation. He refused to accept that his own actions, his own deep-seated prejudice had brought him to this point. The first court date was a blur of flashing cameras and shouted questions. He was a ghost, shuffling through the media circus in an ill-fitting suit, his face pale and drawn. He pleaded not guilty, a desperate act of defiance against the mountain of evidence against him. But the real karma, the hard, grinding karma that life reserves for those who inflict misery upon others, was only just beginning. It wasn't going to come from a judge or a jury. It was going to come from his own past, from a ghost he thought he had long since buried. Sarah Jenkins, the reporter, wasn't done digging. While reviewing Miller's old case files, she came across a narcotics conviction from 6 years earlier. A young man named Leo Soto had been sentenced to 10 years in prison based almost entirely on the testimony of the arresting officer, Jack Miller. Miller had claimed to have found a significant quantity of heroin during a plain view search of Soto's vehicle during a routine traffic stop. Soto had always maintained his innocence, claiming the drugs were planted. No one had listened. Jenkins noticed a discrepancy in the evidence log, a small clerical detail that most would have overlooked. It was a thread, and she began to pull. The story of Jack Miller was far from over. His downfall was about to become a catalyst for a much larger, more terrible reckoning. For Jack Miller, the concept of karma had always been a blunt instrument, something wielded by others. It was the satisfying, simplistic equation he'd see play out when a career criminal he'd busted finally got a long prison sentence. It was a cosmic justice reserved for the scumbags and the thugs, a confirmation of his own righteous place in the world. He never once imagined that its intricate, poignant calculus could apply to him. Now karma was the very air he breathed, the bitter taste in his mouth, the oppressive gravity that pulled him down into a new, bleak reality. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic lightning bolt from the heavens. It was a slow, grinding erosion of his entire existence, a daily torment meticulously crafted from the consequences of his own deep-seated hatred. His life became a series of descending circles of humiliation. The federal charges loomed a guillotine over his future. A separate civil lawsuit filed by Agent Thorne, with the full backing of the ACLU, arrived at his door. It wasn't just a legal document. It was a multi-million-dollar testament to his failure, a demand for punitive damages that would ensure his financial ruin for the rest of his natural life. He was untouchable, a social leper. Former colleagues, men with whom he'd shared holiday meals and backyard barbecues, would now see him in the grocery store and abruptly steer their carts down a different aisle, their faces masks of strained neutrality. The thin blue line he had so staunchly defended had become an impenetrable wall, and he was on the wrong side of it. The final betrayal in his mind came from his wife, Laura. She didn't scream or throw plates. Her departure was a quiet, devastating affair. He returned one afternoon from yet another fruitless attempt to find work, his spirit worn thin, to find her side of the closet, empty the drawers of her dresser gaping open like mouths in a silent scream. A note lay on the perfectly made bed. It didn't rage about the racist cop he'd been revealed to be, or the federal criminal he was about to become. It contained only 2 soul-crushing sentences: "I look at you, and I no longer recognize the man I married. I don't know who you are anymore." He read the words over and over, the paper trembling in his hand. That was worse than any accusation. It was an erasure. He lost the house, the physical symbol of his entire life's work. The "sold" sign, hammered into the manicured lawn, felt like a personal affront. He retreated into a cramped, dingy apartment complex that smelled of stale cigarettes and boiled cabbage, located in a part of town he once patrolled with open disdain. The irony was a constant, suffocating companion. He sold his Ford F-150, his symbol of masculine pride, and bought a rattling 20-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door, the exact kind of vehicle he would have profiled and pulled over without a second thought just a few months prior. After weeks of rejections, he finally found work. Not in security, not in any field that required trust or a clean record. A foreman at a sprawling construction site, a man whose face was a leathery roadmap of indifference, hired him as a day laborer. He didn't ask for a resume. He just looked at Miller's large frame and calloused hands and grunted, $12 an hour, start tomorrow at 6. The work was a brutal physical punishment. He who had once held absolute authority now hauled sheets of drywall up rickety staircases, mixed concrete until his shoulders screamed, and cleaned up trash left by other workers. His hands, once accustomed to the cool steel of a firearm, became raw, blistered, and permanently caked with grime. He worked alongside undocumented men from Guatemala and El Salvador, men he once would have delighted in rounding up for ICE. They spoke to him in a rapid-fire Spanish, assuming from his silence and his worn-out clothes that he was just another piece of human driftwood like them. He never corrected them. He just kept his head down, the scorching sun beating on his neck, his spirit as broken and anonymous as the rubble he cleared away. For the first time in his life, he understood the crushing, invisible weight of being a nobody. And it was a heavier burden than any bag of concrete. Meanwhile, across town, the reporter who had precipitated his fall, Sarah Jenkins, was staring at a computer screen in the sterile quiet of the Virginia Pilot's digital archives. She couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't over. Miller's downfall was too neat, too clean. Men with that much hate rarely confined it to a single act. She believed the encounter with Agent Thorne wasn't an anomaly. It was a revelation. She began a meticulous, thankless, deep dive into every single felony arrest Jack Miller had ever made. It was a mountain of data reports, evidence logs, court transcripts, days blurred into nights fueled by lukewarm coffee and a stubborn, gnawing intuition. She was looking for a pattern, a single loose thread. She found it in the case of a young man named Leo Soto. The official story was simple. 6 years ago, Miller had pulled Soto over for a broken taillight. During the stop, Miller claimed to have seen in plain view on the passenger seat a bag containing a brick of heroin. Soto, who had no significant prior offenses, swore the drugs weren't his, that they were planted. It was his word against a decorated police officer's. He was swiftly convicted and sentenced to 10 years in a state penitentiary. Jenkins read Miller's sworn testimony. It was confident, precise, and utterly damning. But as she cross-referenced it with the other documents, she found the thread. It was a small detail, a clerical inconsistency most would have dismissed. The evidence submission form, signed by Miller, logged the seized heroin into the station's evidence locker at 11:45 p.m. on the night of the arrest. But the official dispatch log, a document she had to file 3 separate requests to obtain, showed that Miller had cleared the scene of Soto's traffic stop at 11:15 p.m. and was marked as back in service. 30 minutes, she thought, her pulse quickening. A 30-minute gap between the end of the arrest and the logging of the evidence. Where did he go? Her next request was a long shot, the GPS data from Miller's patrol unit for that specific night. After weeks of bureaucratic stonewalling, she got it. The data file was dry, just a list of coordinates and timestamps. But when she plotted them on a map, her breath caught in her throat. After leaving the scene of Soto's arrest, Miller's cruiser hadn't driven to the main police station. It had taken a detour, parking for 17 minutes in a dark, desolate industrial cul-de-sac. A cul-de-sac that Jenkins discovered through an old city zoning map was directly behind the Oak Haven PD's auxiliary evidence depot. a run-down warehouse used to store narcotics and firearms from closed cases before their scheduled incineration. The theory that bloomed in her mind was monstrous. Miller didn't find the drugs. He created the crime. He pulled over a kid he didn't like, decided to ruin his life, drove to the secondary evidence locker, grabbed a brick of heroin from an old forgotten case, and then framed Leo Soto with it. She took her meticulously organized findings, the conflicting timelines, the GPS map, the property records, to a weary but brilliant attorney named Ben Carter, who volunteered for the Innocence Project. Carter listened patiently, his face skeptical. "Sarah, you're asking me to believe a veteran cop risked his entire career to frame some random kid over a broken taillight," Carter said, rubbing his temples. "It's a hell of an accusation. It's the only accusation the data supports," she countered, pushing the GPS map across his desk. "Look, 17 minutes. That's more than enough time to break the seal on an old storage box, grab a brick, and get back in the car." He had the opportunity. With his record of complaints, he damn sure had the inclination. And he knew nobody would ever believe Leo Soto over him. Carter stared at the map for a long time. He traced the route with his finger. He looked at the dispatch log, then at the evidence form. The pieces clicked into place. The skepticism in his eyes was replaced by a look of dawning horror. The legal motion they filed sent a seismic shock through the county's justice system. The district attorney, already in damage control mode from the Agent Thorne scandal, was now faced with a full-blown institutional crisis. A special prosecutor was appointed. A judge, a stern woman with a reputation for integrity, ordered an immediate full-scale audit of every single case Miller had ever been the primary arresting officer on. And she ordered the evidence from the Soto case to be unsealed and re-examined using modern forensic techniques. In a climate-controlled lab, a technician carefully dusted the inner layers of the plastic bag that had held the heroin for 6 years. Leo Soto's prints were nowhere to be found. But on the sticky side of a piece of old evidence tape, used to seal the bag, they found a clear, whirled, partial thumbprint, a print that the original investigation had missed. The print was run through the state and federal databases. A few hours later, the hit came back. It wasn't a match for Leo Soto. It was a perfect, undeniable match for former Oak Haven police officer Jack Miller. The day Leo Soto walked out of the prison gates, blinking in the unfamiliar sunlight, Jack Miller was arrested again. There were no federal agents this time. The men who cuffed him were his former colleagues, detectives who couldn't meet his eye, their faces etched with a grim mixture of disgust and shame. The new charges were a death blow, perjury, tampering with evidence, false imprisonment. The news of Soto's exoneration was the event that finally shattered Miller's delusion of victimhood. It was the public, undeniable proof that he wasn't a good cop who had made a single mistake. He was a fraud. He was a man who had used his badge as a weapon to send an innocent person to a cage, all for the fleeting, pathetic thrill of his own power. The ultimate, most profound karma, however, was not delivered by a judge or a jury. It arrived on a cracked, weed-choked sidewalk on a Tuesday evening. Miller was walking the half-mile from the bus stop to his apartment, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He was out on bail, a pariah, awaiting a trial he knew he couldn't win. He kept his eyes down, focused on the ground, trying to will himself into invisibility. A modest late-model sedan slowed to a stop beside him. The passenger window hummed down. Miller looked up, annoyed at the interruption. His blood ran cold. The man behind the wheel was in his late 20s, with dark, intelligent eyes that held a universe of pain. It was Leo Soto. Miller froze, every muscle in his body tensing. This was it. The confrontation he had dreaded. He expected shouting curses, perhaps even violence. He knew on some level that he deserved it. But Soto's voice when he spoke was unnervingly calm. "Mr. Miller." The name spoken without a trace of irony felt like a slap. Miller could only stare, mute and terrified. "I just needed to see you," Soto said, his hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. "My family told me not to. My lawyer said it was a bad idea, but I had to. For 6 years I lived in a concrete box because of you. I read books to keep from going insane. I watched my mother age through a thick pane of glass during visiting hours. My father died of a heart attack 2 years ago, believing his only son was a drug dealer. You didn't just steal my time, Mr. Miller. You stole my father's peace. You stole my name." Miller opened his mouth, but no sound came out. What could he say? "I'm sorry." The words were a hollow mockery. "And I look at you now." Soto continued, his gaze taking in Miller's ragged work clothes. The deep lines of despair etched into his face, the utter brokenness of his posture. "And I thought I would feel rage. I thought I would want to hurt you. But I don't." Soto shook his head slowly, a look of genuine, profound sadness in his eyes. "All I feel is pity. It's pathetic. You had so much power, the power to protect, to help, to be a good man. And you used it all to crush someone who had nothing. For what? So you could feel big for few minutes. Look at yourself. You have nothing. You are nothing." Soto didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His quiet, devastating assessment of Miller's character was more punishing than any blow. He had held up a perfect mirror and forced Jack Miller to see the shriveled, empty soul staring back. "I'm going to be okay," Soto said, a flicker of steel entering his voice. "I'm enrolled in community college. I'm going to be an architect. I'm going to build things. But you're going to spend the rest of your life trapped in this bitterness, this shame. Whether you're in a prison cell or in this sad little apartment, you'll be in a cage of your own making. You have to live with being you. That's your life sentence." With a final lingering look of sorrow, Leo Soto rolled up his window and quietly drove away, leaving Jack Miller standing alone on the sidewalk as the streetlights began to flicker on. In that profound, crushing silence, the full weight of his karma finally settled. It wasn't the loss of his job, his wife, or even his impending loss of freedom. It was the quiet, final judgment from the very man whose life he had so casually destroyed. It was the sudden, gut-wrenching realization that his true punishment wasn't going to be a prison term. It was the inescapable knowledge, a knowledge he would carry with him for every second of every day, for the rest of his miserable life, that he had built his entire identity on a foundation of pathetic, meaningless hate. And from that prison, there would be no possibility of parole. The story of Jack Miller isn't just about one racist cop. It's a stark reminder of the devastating ripple effect of unchecked power and the insidious nature of systemic prejudice. His downfall, brought about by the courage of Agent Marcus Thorne and the tenacity of a reporter like Sarah Jenkins, highlights the critical importance of accountability. But the true gut-wrenching karma came from the quiet dignity of Leo Soto, a man who, after having his life stolen, chose not vengeance, but a powerful, profound pity. It's a story of how hate in the end consumes itself, leaving behind an empty, pathetic void. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet truth, spoken on a lonely street, a final, inescapable reckoning that a person must carry with them forever. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell for more real-life stories of drama justice and the powerful, unyielding hand of karma. What did you think of Miller's ultimate fate? Let me know in the comments below.